welcome. Shabbat Shalom. We will get started here on Are You Revelation Ready? We will start with prayer. Come before the Father, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. We thank you for joining this morning, and the next voice you will hear is that of the teacher, Charlie McLaughlin.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to everyone. It's good to be back with you this week as we continue our study on being revelation ready. Very important to be ready because we are already in the book of Revelation. As I said on last week, we've covered the things we need to repent of in order to be ready. One, to understand Revelation, and two, to be successful in this time as we move through the book of Revelation on earth. And we also dealt with the seven keys. In the past, as we started our study, I did a brief review on last week. It was kind of long because it is quite a bit. We started in January, but the list, I believe, is on the website where we have our information, the list, what I call it, the short version, the chart, just summarizing the list of the seven things we need to repent of, the seven keys we need to understand Revelation. And then we got into the book of Revelation, moving through the chapters. So we're now in chapter 9. We have covered the seven seals, 6 seals. Actually, we're in the seventh seal, but the seventh seal contains 2 sevens. When the seventh seal was opened in chapter 8, the trumpets began to sound. So we have the 7 trumpets, and the 7 trumpets will be followed by the 7 bowls. But we're in this trumpet number 5. Last week is where we focused. We'll say a little bit more about that on today. Again, remember the key is that in the counts of sevens, you will always, this is one of the 7 keys, you will always find the main point and or the turning point of the series, particularly of the 6, because the 7th is more like the rest in Genesis, based on Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 3. On the 7th day, God rested. No work was being done. So think of these 7s as they're going forth in the book of Revelation as the works of God in the day of God's vengeance, the day of God's judgments upon the earth. And this is also spoken of in Isaiah 61, where Yeshua stopped in verse 2 concerning his first coming, where he proclaimed the day of the acceptable day of the Lord, or acceptable year of the Lord. He stopped short in the middle of that verse, and they were upset with him because Rome was in power, and they really wanted to continue that, what was called a Torah portion. The Torah portion is very similar to like what we do in the Christian denominations, in circles. You'll see there's Sunday school lessons. Those lessons are already planned out in terms of what they're going to cover, generally within 5 or 10 year period in advance their plan. So people are following a script that is determined by the World Council of Churches, National Council of Churches, the religious powers that be, that are function in what is called an ecumenical way. However, many times those lessons will not be addressing the needs of the congregation at the time that they're being taught, based upon, one, the time, what's going on in the earth at the current time, and two, based upon the location. That's why Yeshua in Matthew chapter 23, when he dealt with the leadership, because they were teaching things that were based upon their tradition, and by doing so, they made the word of God of none effect, because they gave equal weight to their traditions, equal, and actually put it above the word of God. If you know the history and the actual laws, that is the laws of the Pharisees, the dogma, um, the ordinances that they wrote, that they said they got from Mount Sinai, that those things being taught alongside the word of God made God's word, and still do to this day, make God's word ineffective in the lives of his people. So he told his disciples not to be called rabbi, not to be called masters, not to be called father, because those speak of the leadership in the world, where you deal with the, how do we say, well, how does the Bible say? God speaks of the church as his bride, whom he married at Mount Sinai. And so when we get into the book of Revelation, and we remember we mentioned Yeshua, Jesus, came as the last Adam. Adam had a bride. Both of them failed. But Yeshua, as the last Adam, has been successful and is now sit down at the right hand of God. But now his bride is getting ready to be tested. And with the bride, there's the genuine bride who is being purified, so that she is without spot, wrinkle, or any such thing, as he said in Ephesians 5. If you read around verse 27, 26, 27, 28, you'll read there, where he's cleaning up his church by the washing of water with the word. Where you have his bride, but there is a counterfeit bride, and the counterfeit is the whore. Both are the women. One is typified, is following Abraham's, the example of Abraham and Sarah. Sarah was Abraham's bride, who is in prophecy, prophesying the future brides when they go down to Egypt. In Genesis chapter 12, Abraham tells Sarah to say that she is his sister, and not to mention that she is also his wife. He does that in a time where he is prophesying. Remember, Abraham is the first person identified as a prophet in the Bible. The first time the word prophet is used in the Bible, it is where God is referring to Abraham as a prophet. Genesis 20, verse 7. But in chapter 12, he is in Egypt, and he's in Egypt because of a famine. And because of that, he is walking out a prophecy that his descendants would also end up in Egypt as a result of a famine. Abraham never says, "Thus saith the Lord," but what he does do is he literally walks out as like Yeshua, following the script. He's actually walking out the script of what would take place in the future. Yeshua walked out the script of what was already said he would do in the scripture to fulfill it in his coming. Not only the first time, but also the events concerning his body, his bride, and his return, which we are now experiencing as we move through the book of Revelation. However, Abraham gave a dual prophecy. He not only prophesied of the time when his people would be taken into bondage, typified in Sarah being taken into Pharaoh's house, and God having to plague Pharaoh for Sarah to go back to her husband Abraham, and then he sends them out with wealth. That was a prophecy of the Egyptian bondage, which took place, and it did not cover 430 years in terms of the time of Joseph, because Joseph, when Joseph dies, he's empowered, and Joseph, after Joseph's death, Moses is born 64 years later. 64 years later. So you only have you have 144 years that's maximum possible, because in 144 years, 80 years after Moses' birth, you have a total of 144 years from Joseph's death to Moses' birth. So your 400-year prophecy in Genesis chapter 15 cannot fit into the story of Egypt, though it's very similar. Yet God prophesied through Abraham another time where there would be an enslavement of the bride. And that time was the 400-year prophecy that he gave to Abraham in Genesis 15. You can start around verse 12 and read down to about verse 17. But when this happens, he's prophesying this one as a prophet in Genesis chapter 20. And it is the main event. Why? Because it happens in the last days. And in the last days, it was so important that God decided here in Genesis chapter 20, verse 7, to reveal that Abraham is the prophet. He is a prophet. And he reveals it to King Abimelech, who we have covered that he is a type of the beast. Not Abimelech, the king that Abraham deals with, but his name. The king's part in the prophecy, Abimelech, in chapter 20, is that he's a Philistine king. He's a Palestinian king. The word Palestinian, the word Philistine are the same words in Hebrew, going back to Genesis chapter 10, I think verse 4, where you find that they are descended from Mitzrayim. They're descended from Ham's son, Mitzrayim, which is translated Egypt. And it gives you the genealogy there of where Philistia, you see it translated as Philistia. I said chapter 10, verse 4, did it? You'd have to, there it's down 14. You can look down at verse 14, you'll see. Not verse 4, but verse 14, where in verse 13 it tells you who Egypt or Mitzrayim begot Ludum and Anamim and Lehabim and Naphtuhim and Pashrushim and Kalushim. Now you notice what it says in verse 14, and Kalushim, out of whom came Philistine. That is the word Philistines. That's the Philistines, and you can check that out with the Strongs. It's just the speaking of them as a people, Philistine. And if you look it up, it says Philistine, Philishet, Philistite. And so this is the beginning of the Philistines. They came out of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, the son of Ham, and he had a son named Kalushim, and out of Kalushim was the Philistines. And before they arrived in the western part of the land of Canaan, which is on near the western coast, which would be the border, the coast where the Mediterranean is on the west side of the land of Israel, which was at that time called the land of Canaan in general. They came to live there, and there were 5 basic nation groups that were there, the lords of the Philistines. There were 5 basic ones during the time of, as you recall, the time of the time of Samson, when he brings down their temple. They worship the fish god, Dagon. Okay, so I don't want to get too much in there, but to keep in mind, when you hear the word Palestinian, you're dealing with the Egyptians, but when the ones who identify with them today are being called Palestinians, and that designation doesn't come from their ethnicity, it came from Rome. Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD renamed the land of Judea. He renamed it Palestina. And he did so to spite the Jews because they had rebelled against Rome a second time. The first time, the temple was destroyed, which Yeshua spoke of and prophesied. But the second time in 135, AD, when he put down their rebellion, which I think actually began around 132, but in 135, when he put down the second Jewish revolt, he renamed the land Palestina, and the basic name stuck until 1947, when the United Nations correctly recognized the land as the land of Israel. But the nation there that is there now, by and large, is the nation of the southern kingdom, Judea, and those who claim their allegiance to the Torah. However, they're there set up as a democracy rather than as a theocracy, which God gave to them at Mount Sinai, because they made a commitment that they would follow him and obey him, and that he was their king. Later, they chose one of the kings, but they rejected him as a king, as you read in Samuel. So God is the king. His son is the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, who is going to come back to claim his inheritance. He is the seed of the prophesied seed of Abraham, singular, that came through the descendants, which we see listed from Adam in Luke, from Adam all the way down to Yeshua in Matthew, going all the way back from Abraham all the way down to Yeshua. But this is important, because the second prophecy, going back to where were we? I was saying that the 400-year prophecy was a second prophecy that where Abraham walks it out in chapter 20. In chapter 12, he is prophesying Egypt using Sarah. God's using Sarah as a type of the bride, God's people. And he does it again in chapter 20, but in a different location, where he's in Gerar, which is in the land of the Philistines. And he's with a king called Abimelech, where this happens. And then the same thing basically happens. God plagues the household of King Abimelech, and God tells him, that's verse 20, chapter 20, verse 7, where he tells Abimelech that Abraham is a prophet, and he reveals that Sarah is Abraham's wife. This is a second prophecy of the greater Exodus that we will see, when all the bones of Joseph, the valley of the dry bones, Ezekiel 37, where they're scattered now in all nations, not just in Egypt, but where they're scattered amongst the nations of the world, of the earth. And they will be gathered together and brought into the wilderness again. And this was a prophecy of that last days, which occurs shortly after the end of the 400-year prophecy, when the 400 years expired. Oh, by the way, the 400 years has expired already. And so we are there. I don't know if I did cover that at some point, a little bit in the past. I won't go into it into detail right now. As we go through the book of Revelation, I will touch on it. But the gist of it is this, is that the first slaves to arrive did not come in 1619. They came to Virginia in 1619, but they came to Bermuda in 1616, 3 years earlier. And as a result, that all resulted from a shipwreck where John Roloff was on a ship headed to Jamestown, Virginia, under the Jamestown, Virginia Charter, and the shipwreck landed them on the island of Bermuda. And Bermuda at that time was noticed by Britain, and in 1612 they got their own charter. And after that, their governor, they led the people there to bring slaves in August of 1616 to dive for pearls off the coast of Bermuda. That's important. So why? Because that was the beginning of where you would find the lost son, the lost sheep, the lost coin that he talked about, Jesus talked about in Luke chapter 15. They actually printed a coin, a national coin, during a time in their history at Bermuda when they became a colony. And it was a coin with the emblem of a wild Spanish hog on it. You can still pull up some pictures of it in some of your research if you look at it online. I did the research at Bermuda. I went to their official website, their government website, when they were celebrating concurrently with the U.S. their 400-year anniversary, because there was only 10 months difference between where they arrived at Bermuda, the ship crashed, and then 10 months later they finally make it on into Jamestown, those who survived. And so their history tracks closely with the history of the United States, being that this is where the ship crashed first on its way to Virginia. As a matter of fact, the play that Shakespeare wrote called The Tempest was based upon that actual shipwreck. John Roloff is the man who married Pocahontas later on and takes her to England. If you know the history. It's very important to know history because God told us he declared the end from the beginning and from ancient times, things that are not yet done. So he says he shows us the future in the details that he orchestrates in history, namely in the Bible, in the scripture from Genesis all the way up to Jude. So Revelation is basically a manifestation of what God has shown us already from Genesis to Jude. And so Yeshua was making reference to this place, Bermuda, when he gave the parable of the lost. Now understand, when he spoke of the lost in specific terms as an apostle, as a sent one, he says, I'm not sent, he was not sent, but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So whenever he's identifying the lost, he's primarily speaking of the northern kingdom, the lost sheep of the house of Israel, who had to be reached because Judah was already present on earth in Judea, in the land of Israel, when he came in human form, when he came to the earth. But Joseph was not. The lost sheep speaks of Joseph. That's why Joseph is the one who was dead and lost to his father, being hated by his brother. He's a type of Yeshua. And he's also a type of those whom Yeshua was sending the 12 out into the world and the 70 out, that they would continue to go out to the uttermost parts of the earth to reach those lost sheep, to bring them back. This prophecy was primarily given in Hosea, we say Hosea, concerning them being divorced, having no mercy, and being scattered. The names of chapter 1, the names of Hosea's sons that God told him to give to his sons and his daughter that he had with Gomer. These are all tied into the book of Revelation, and the details are there from Genesis to Jude of what's going on in the book of Revelation as a replay of things that have already taken place in history. Like the abomination took place 168 BC. We have a holiday called Hanukkah that's based upon God's victory through his people restoring the worship of the true God in Jerusalem after the temple had been desecrated, and Antiochus was responsible for desecrating the altar by sacrificing a pig on it, and then erecting a statue to Zeus or Jupiter, same one, different national language. In Greek he's called Zeus. In Latin he's called Jupiter, the sun god, but they claimed his birthday was December 25th, the day that the desecration took place. And on the anniversary, 3 years later, they recaptured Jerusalem. Small number of priests led the revolt against this Greek army that was coming from the base of Syria, Damascus, Syria, where Antiochus IV was reigning from at the time. and they conquered them and restored the worship. And that was the last time you had Jews having sovereign control over the land of Israel. Because during the time when Yeshua was born, Rome had sovereign control over the nation, the land of Israel, over the nation of Israel. They were still acknowledged religiously, allowed to do things religiously, and keep the feast, and all that was because God orchestrated so that his son could fulfill his mission in his first coming. Now, you said, why am I going through this as we're going through the book of Revelation? Because all of these things are being fulfilled now, coming to a head now, and if we don't understand the history, we don't know what's happening now currently. Because all of these prophecies in the book of Revelation are coming out of the Tanakh, that is what we call, is called the Old Testament scriptures, as well as the New. But the majority of the prophecies are in the Old Covenant scriptures, the Tanakh. So we go through this. So the fulfillment, 1616 was the beginning of your 400 years, and some point maybe later we'll deal with that as a complete subject in and of itself, the 400-year prophecy, because this nation is getting ready to be judged as God prophesied in Genesis 15, and his people are going to come out with great wealth. This is already in play. God is already setting up major ways that he will bring the diaspora of Israel, who often identify as Africans because that was the last location before they were largely sold into slavery like Joseph, and particularly Ephraim, sold into slavery like Joseph in the transatlantic slave trade. We covered that mainly in the 7 P's of Joseph and when we deal with the 400-year prophecy. But we'll mention some things, and if you got questions, we'll deal with them at the end of this lesson. But for time's sake, let's go ahead and get back into the book of Revelation. It said that Abraham gave a second prophecy, and that second prophecy was concerning the time when Abimelech, not the king. The king was a type of the Philistines trying to have control of the land at the same time that God's people, like Abraham, is in the land. And then his namesake, because his name is, when you search it, you find his name, Abimelech, shows up in Judges chapter 9 as the name of the first king of Israel, one of Gideon's sons. Gideon had 72 sons, by the way, and at that time he's being called Jerubbaal instead of Gideon. You have to go from chapter 7 on, and you'll see where the name changed, where they start calling Gideon Jerubbaal. And but he has 72 sons, and one of his sons' names is Abimelech, and that Abimelech is the type of is the second mention. Abraham is the pointer as a prophet by his dealings with Abimelech, but Abimelech's name shows up again later in Judges 9, where he becomes king of Israel. And he gets those where Joseph is buried there in Shechem. That's where his mother was from, Abimelech. He goes and stays with his mom's people there, and he talks them into collaborating with him to go and kill his brothers. He kills 70 of his 71 brothers. Then he later is going to die. That whole chapter 9, you read it, you got the whole story, how he dies. I tell you what, we'll put that on hold because we're going to get into that when we deal with Revelation chapter 13, which is about that beast, which he is the type of. He is going to die as a result of being hit in the head by a woman throwing a millstone off the wall. And then he's later going to be mentioned in David's story, which deals with after the deadly head wound reveals the clue of where he will come alive again. And I just for short, just to be direct to the point, Abimelech was a type of the United Nations and the person who is going to end up heading it. after the New United Nations, had received a deadly head wound to its headquarters. Okay, so to speak. So we go on. So we were at. I'm throwing some of these things out there because, again, we've covered a lot of it in teaching, but I'll intersperse some of it in as we go along because we do have others who have come in that were not with us in some of the past lessons. But you can go back and get all of those and see everything that we've taught since we started this teaching. Though I will reference some of them as we go through the book of Revelation. Last week we talked about the fifth trumpet. Excuse me. Get a little bit of water, please. Well, excuse me. Okay. And we'll back up a little bit. Remember, we said that at the center of seven angels are sounding their trumpets. But at the center of a series of seven, God reveals the main point and or the turning point. And we saw that in the fourth trumpet, where the 1/3, everything's happening in thirds up until we get to the fifth trumpet. A third of the sun, the moon, and the stars are darkened at night and at day, for a third part of them. And then he gives the warning concerning the next things that are coming. And he says, the woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth because of the sound of the last three trumpets, which would be the fifth, sixth, and seventh. And we remember that those woes, which speaks of great grief that is coming, Yeshua spoke those woes in Matthew chapter 23, the last day he was teaching in the temple, when he's dealing with the Pharisees, scribes, and hypocrites, particularly when he starts talking about them. And so you realize that in these woes, he's dealing with the whore. He's dealing with the false bride. He's dealing with the ones who have the Nicolaitan doctrine. We covered this when we went through the seven churches. He mentioned something that he hates, the doctrine of the Nicolaitans and their deeds. And he spoke of the doctrine of Balaam, who was getting paid to do what he did, while God intervened and used him to prophesy part of the Torah in Numbers, in the book of Numbers. But he was genuinely a prophet. What made him a false prophet? Because he worked for the wrong side. He worked against God. He used his gift against God. But it was a gift he had. So often when you say someone is a false prophet, doesn't mean they're not a prophet. It means that they're using their prophetic gift falsely, meaning they're using it against God. That's why he gave in Deuteronomy 13 and in Deuteronomy 18 the commandment that if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, seer of visions, if they indeed see something and it comes to pass, but it causes the people he leads, or that person leads the people to go against the Torah, to go against the law of God, know that it is a false prophet. And God says that he has sent him to test the people whether they are loyal to him. So it's important to understand that in the book of Revelation, these figures, these major figures are being named, and those I mentioned, what? Balaam, then what would you want to just Nicolaitan doctrine. But then in the center of those churches, you had the fourth church, the fourth ecclesia, the fourth Keilah, the fourth assembly that Yeshua speaks to. He didn't write, John wrote it, but Yeshua dictated it to him, the letter. The fourth, you find the center is where the great tribulation is mentioned. Because the greatest theme of the judgment that comes against God's people, particularly Judah in Jerusalem, is the great tribulation. And it's because they are engaging in what is happening in the fourth church. That's why Yeshua says that he will kill her children with death. Jezebel. He is tying the event concerning the great tribulation to what happened to Jezebel. And we know Jezebel was the wife of Ahab. So we're talking about King Ahab of the northern kingdom, who also, by the way, has 70. Now, Gideon had 72 sons. Abimelech killed 70 of his brothers. Ahab has 70 sons. And when Jehu becomes king, he is going to have the leadership, the elders, to kill 70 of Ahab's sons, all a type of the United Nations. 70 is a number that represents the nations of the earth, often translated and called Gentile instead of nations, the Gentiles. The 70. Hence Yeshua sends out 12 to preach, and then he also sends out 70 who are not the 12 apostles, but they are sent ones nevertheless. They are sent not in the gift of the apostle, but in the work of the apostolic work, in the Great Commission. And so in the latter days, we see all of this is still effective in the sending out of people to preach the gospel of the kingdom to the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, all of Noah's sons, descendants who have repopulated the earth to this day. Now, where were we? Okay, so we will. Oh, about this middle church. He mentions great tribulation. Yeshua, the phrase great tribulation only occurs 3 times in the Bible. In the King James, you'll see it in Matthew chapter 24, down at verse 21, which is concurrent with the time of verse 15, where he says the abomination desolation, because it stands for 3.5 years, and that period is called the Great Tribulation in verse 21, where he says in those times there will be great tribulation unlike it has ever been before or will be afterwards. But he's specifically speaking to Jerusalem and Judea. And so that's important to note, because it will not be as bad before. There's not been anything as bad in terms of great tribulation before or after it in the history of mankind. And Yeshua makes that statement in verse 21 of chapter 24. But the point is that when this happens, he tells them just as it had happened before in the abomination desolation of 168 in the land of Judea and Jerusalem, where the pig was sacrificed on God's altar in order to set up a democratic government, which was the form of government at the time that Alexander the Great used when he conquered their nations. If you know your history, when Alexander would conquer a nation, he would then go into that nation's a major city-state that was conquered, and he would rebuild it. And he would put the best of the Greeks' religion, education, worship, the Olympics, all of that was given to them. Why? Because Alexander was trained by Aristotle. He wasn't just a brilliant warrior, but the man was very intelligent. He was trained by the best Greek teachers, Aristotle being his personal teacher. And so he understood, these people are going to hate me because I just killed all of their husbands and their fathers and their brothers in the war to conquer them, but I'm going to win them by putting the best we have that Greece has to offer and rebuilding their city so that they'll be Hellenized. That's where you get the word Hellenistic Jews in Acts chapter 6 that were being neglected in the daily administration, because his policy was to form a democracy wherever he conquered. And one of the blessings of him doing it, not a blessing, but one of the advantages of him doing this is when he did that, it gave the people a government on a lower level where they have a voice, but that form of government where everyone gets to decide, everyone gets a vote. It's been tried, it never worked. Why? One, because if you're a minority, the majority will always overrule you. That was why they tried to do that. That's how they tried to keep slavery in place. The majority rule. If the majority of people say we want slavery, then you're going to have slavery. But when our Constitution was put in place, it gave us a republic form of government, Republican form, not the party, understand, but a government based not upon just the people rule, but the people are the government, but they set that their nation is ruled by laws and that no one is above the law. That's the premise of it, that everyone has to answer to the law, that the higher up government, when they come into power, they could not override the rights of the people because the rights are given not by the government, but by God. Remember, it was based on our Declaration of Independence, which said all men were created equal. And that's what was being tested during the time of the Civil War, because people were now realizing after they said, we want to separate from Britain. Remember, slavery was not a United States institution. It was a British colonial institution that when we, as a nation, declared independence, those who had been using it and profiting from it wanted to continue it. And so there was a great debate about that. And all of this is dealing with what? We're dealing with Joseph's people, Joseph's son Ephraim, and the tribes that are being brought to this nation to form a new nation that God had actually promised to David. Most people don't know that God promised Israel that he would plant them in a land. They're already in the promised land. This is in the book of Samuel, 2 Samuel, that he would plant them in a land, Israel, in a land of their own, and that David would have descendants reigning over them until Yeshua come back. David would never cease to have his descendants reigning up until Yeshua comes back, till Jesus comes back, till Yeshua comes as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. But he didn't say they would be reigning in the land of Israel. He said over Israel. Israel got carried away. Judah remained. And the last king of Judah was Zedekiah, of David's descent. That's another story. We have to get into that another time, because I focus on Joseph's story, but I also know Judah's story. You see, David had some daughters. Zedekiah had daughters, and they were not named for a reason in Jeremiah's story, but they're with Jeremiah. Most people don't even remember this, and that story connects all the way back to Judah, back to Tamar. See, God actually began this story when Judah, in the midst of Joseph's story in chapter 38, one chapter devoted to Judah, how Judah gets his family. The two leaders that's going to be the two houses of Israel, representing the two houses of Israel, are being dealt with from chapter 37 to 50, but Judah only gets one chapter devoted specifically to him. Chapter 38. Chapter 30 of Genesis. Yeah, chapter 37 to 50, by and large, is Joseph's story. But Judah is the only other brother where it tells you who his wives are and who his children are. None of the other brothers have this happen, because God was showing us the two houses actually from the time that Jacob, Israel, left Laban. And again, that was a prophecy of Egyptian captivity and last days captivity. See, how is that? Because Laban's name, again, the name just like Abimelech, Laban's name is a proper noun, is a name, but as a common noun, it has two different meanings. It's one word, but it has two meanings. It means brick and it means white. And so when he left servitude to Laban, which spoke of bricks, it was a type of Jacob working, his children being enslaved in Egypt, where it's going to be mentioned that bricks were a significant component in their slavery, because they were making bricks. But in the latter days, during the 400-year time of slavery, it would be not the issue of Laban being brick, but the other meaning of the word Laban means white. And they said because bricks were white in the Middle East, in the land of Israel, you see a lot of sand. A lot of them bricks, they're white stone. Most of the buildings there When you're riding all over the land there, you see all these white bricks, buildings, because Lebanon, the bricks were made, they were made from white stone that was largely, that was white. And so it was a dual prophecy that Jacob gave in his servitude to Laban, that he would end up fleeing from him, just like his descendants would when they come out fleeing from Pharaoh, after having had been slaves making bricks, Laban. But in the latter day, just as Abraham gave a dual prophecy, Jacob gives a dual prophecy, and that dual prophecy speaks of an issue concerning the servitude would be white. And the white is basically being attributed to Japheth when Japheth comes to power. So you have Ham first doing this. So understand that neither one of them was right. Ham was the first one to do it. You see it with Nimrod and the building of the Tower of Babel. Then you got Nebuchadnezzar, Shem doing this. Nebuchadnezzar. Then you got, after Alexander the Great comes to power, then Japheth, because he's Greek, Javan. He was a Greek. And from that point, Greco-Roman philosophy has ruled the world in Japheth becoming the third leader. So each of them, if you want to just throw it out there, not to be specifically accurate, but in general terms, each has had their 2,000 years, periods, just about, of Noah's sons running and enslaving their brothers and running this planet. And Japheth has now gotten his turn. And in each case, God brings all three Babylons down. And now he's getting ready to bring the third Babylon down. And the only family that survives out of the three is the fourth one that he started with Abraham, the children of the promise, who are those who believe the word. That's why Paul says in Romans 9 and 8 that the children of the flesh are not the children of God. Now, they may be descendants from Abraham, but they're not the children of God, even if they are of Shem, even if they are of Abraham's descendant, because the only thing counts with God is if they believe and it is accounted to them for righteousness. That's why the gospel is preached, so that people can believe and become children of God through the new birth in God's family, being grafted in to Yeshua, who is the Israel of God. Remember, Exodus 4:22, God reveals the major thing, the most significant revelation concerning who Israel is. He says, tells Moses to tell Pharaoh, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So Yeshua is the Israel of God. Jacob was given his name. Jacob's descendants was given his name. They being called the children of Israel. Yeshua is going to talk about the children who the Lord has given him. When they're questioning him about why he's doing everything he's doing. And he says, he's known by his fruit. He says, the children, look at the children. In other words, he's getting results. People following him, multitudes following. The Jews didn't reject Yeshua. It was the leadership that rejected him. That's why they had a night trial, because they said themselves, the Pharisees, they said the people will stone us. When he asked them about what authority he did, he asked them about John the Baptist. They said, we can't say it, because if we say it's of God, then they're going to ask why we didn't believe in him. Mm-hmm. But if you say it wasn't of God, he said all the people held that John was a prophet. They'll stone us. And they would have stoned him because John pointed to Yeshua and said he was the Christ, the Son of God, the Lamb of God. He named them as all three. So they had a night trial. So it's the leadership. And the leadership is what the Great Tribulation is all about. The religious leaders of Jerusalem and Judea, and also the rest of the world. When you get to the woes, the third woe is all about the woes. The woes, because we're dealing with measured judgment, where you got the two houses, Israel, where Yeshua came as the son of Israel, but the son of Joseph for salvation, but he's coming back later as the son of David, the king, relative to Judah. And so you have the two houses becoming one under him, and so you're getting them being spanked in measure which is revealed in the third seal, that's telling you that what's going on. This is the measured judgments that he talked about in Jeremiah, when he talked about making a full end of all nations. But he said, I will not make a full end of you, but I will not leave you totally unpunished. He said, I will correct you in measure. And we're dealing with the measures. That's where these fractions are showing up. Again, the 1/4 fraction right in the center of the seal, the fourth seal. 1/4 of the people die. Now we into what? We in the trumpets. And so we're in chapter 9, and we see these locusts. Some people debate whether or not they're literal locusts or what kind of locusts they are. But we know from the seals and Zechariah that when he described a horse, the Hebrew word for horse, sus, meant also bird, which 9/11, COVID, and even the things that are transpiring now, dealing with a lot of warfare, with a lot of bombs, things that are flying being used, drones. There's a lot of stuff, technology that we have not yet seen that's going to be released on this earth. But at a time where demons have control of it. Because when Satan is cast down, particularly for his 3.5-year time to come against mainly Jerusalem and Judea, the abomination, desolation, as well as trying to control the world, that he is going to have access to all kinds of technology that was not available during the time of Egypt and all. We don't know where they had during the time of Noah, because these people lived hundreds of years. All that stuff got buried. But all we know is the Lord said it would be as in the days of Noah. And so, but from the Lord's perspective, that means we now are getting back to the technology that they had there. We saw some of it we see some of it in the remains of the Egyptian pyramids. They still can't figure out. Our top scientists in the world can't figure out how this was all done. The Titanic hit iceberg and sunk. The Ark of Noah survived a worldwide flood that flooded that put everything underwater. The technology that these people were given and were able to utilize. So this is amazing. So we're coming to that point. We don't live as long, but we have the technology, and because of the communication we have that allows us to pass information to the next generation and not be lost, we don't lose knowledge now like they did then, before the alphabet was given. So here we are, the fifth angel, and we said the fourth, because this is the fifth, is the first woe. And out of this pit, we talked about, let's see, we just read quickly. And verse 1 of Revelation chapter 9. And the fifth angel sounded, excuse me, and I saw it fall from heaven unto the earth. Now you'll notice that things are coming out of heaven in these trumpets. We see that several times already. But here, to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Just for homework, if you wanted to search this out, look that up, bottomless pit, up in your Strongs. Look up bottomless pit, and you will find that it occurs, if I'm not mistaken, let's see, seven times in the Hebrew, not Hebrew, actually in the New Testament. And all 7 of its occurrences, I'll say 5 of its occurrences, no, 7, it occurs 9 times. 7 of them are in the book of Revelation. Bottomless pit. That's chapter 9, verse 1, verse 2, verse 11. Then in chapter 11, very important, the 2 witnesses. Why? Because we're going to read later that they're killed by the beast that comes out. That's the king over the locusts here in chapter 9. Most people don't make his name is he's Abaddon. He's really Abaddon. He's Abaddon. It tells you his name in verse 11. It says in the Hebrew it's called Abaddon. So I'm just saying Abaddon. Kind of help you to remember he's Abaddon. Nobody's probably as bad as him because he's the one going to kill the 2 prophets in chapter 11. The beast that comes out of the bottomless pit. He's the one that's in charge, the king over the locusts that are flying that are stinging people, men that don't have the mark of God. Remember, the 144,000 were marked in chapter 7, so that their ministry during this time cannot be hindered by the plagues that are coming upon the earth. And this leader called Abaddon, in the Greek, in Hebrew, and he's called Apollyon in Greek. That's 9:11, Revelation 9:11. This is a bad dispatch. Now, the word angel, you got to understand, it means a messenger or a dispatch, one who is dispatched for a purpose. It could be to deliver a message or to accomplish a task. Notice, the one who has all the keys is Yeshua. So he's the one who's orchestrating anything that's going on. Even Satan. Satan has no authority. He has no authority. He had to do the same thing he had to do with Job. God said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" He didn't know what's going on. God knows what Job needs and what Job had a lot of pluses, but there was a few minuses that God's going to deal with later. But he's not talking about that to say God don't badmouth his children to say he take care of them himself. It's a personal matter. But he will allow Satan to be utilized when we don't line up with the Lord, because we were created to be in his image and likeness. And when we're not acting like that, we're acting like that unemployed. I won't say he's unemployed. He's employed by God to do what he's good at. Why? So that people can make a choice. Why? Because God wants people that love him, because he is love. And he gives us a choice to love him. But if you're going to have a choice to love, it's not a choice unless you can choose to not love him. We were created to love him, to please him, for his pleasure. And so these beings that, well, we say fallen, that did not keep their first estate, did not do what they were supposed to do in God's kingdom, they got expelled from the third heaven. Satan still operates high up in the second heaven. That's where he's in the way, in the middle. It's the middle heaven, second heaven. And in that 3.5 years, he's going to be kicked out of it and confined to earth, along with the rest of his angels that are principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, world, spiritual wickedness, and high places. Ephesians 6 talks about them. So what happens here? Now, we said the word bottomless pit shows up 7 times in the book of Revelation. But if you search the Greek word, you find it shows up a total of 9 times in the New Covenant, in the New Testament. If you search the Hebrew word, the Greek word in this case, not Hebrew, in the book of Revelation, you will see that it shows up and Tori, she's pulling it up for those who will be looking at this online with a visual. It'll be, our screen will be visible so you can see that when you go back and do the study, you'll see the same text, because you don't have the Strongs or that, so you'll be able to see it. So you go. It's just taking some time. It's easy to do. It's quick. It takes some time for her to get up. I want her to learn to use this program as fluently as I do. So okay. So you have a total of 9 times, and 2 of the 9 times it's not translated as bottomless pit. So I'll give you those scriptures. It's Luke 8, chapter 8, and verse 31, where it's translated as the deep. And it's also translated as the deep in Romans chapter 10, verse 7. So this is some more information that I had not shared. I think I mentioned this in depth last week. But the king over the locusts, who ascends out of the bottomless pit where they are ascending from, this king Abaddon, he's Abaddon, Apollyon, he ascends out of the bottomless pit. And the bottomless pit is translated as bottomless pit 7 times in the book of Revelation, being Strong's number 12. Greek word 12, number 12. And it occurs 9 times in the New Covenant in the Greek. And it's 2 times it's not translated bottomless pit, it's translated as the deep, as deep. And that's Luke chapter 8, verse 31, and Romans chapter 10, verse 7. Now, why is this important in Luke chapter 8, verse 31? Because the legion, the man that had the legion in him, when Yeshua was casting them out, and it tells you in verse 31, and they besought him, they begging him, that he would not command them to go out into the bottomless pit. But it's translated there, the deep. So they knew about the bottomless pit. And they knew that there was some of their co-angels, fallen ones, already been locked up there until the day of judgment. Until the time, the millennium, which we are entered in 2001, 6001 from Adam, where God starts judging the nations of the world in his final judgments. And that they didn't want to go back to that place. They did not want to go to that place. They didn't want to be commanded, because they knew if he commanded them, they had to go there, because they knew he was the Son of God. When nobody else on earth knew it. They knew who he was, because these are spiritual beings. They didn't know what spirit was in that flesh. That's the one who created them, the one who spoke all things into existence. Now, didn't make them who they are. That was by choice, their will. You know, Satan said, I will 5 times. So angels do have wills. They can make choices, angelic beings. But they don't have the privilege of being in God's image and likeness. So everything in his creation has something of his attributes in it, because he said he can be known by everything he's created. But mankind is the crown of his creation. And Satan wanted that. Lucifer wanted that, still wants that, and Luke's talking about what's going. Luke talking about the place, and where does he send them? Into the pigs. So you understand, Yeshua never had any liking for pork. I don't care what people try to twist Peter's vision that God gave him. God never condoned pork as clean from the time of Noah, before Moses. And the other unclean animals they're animals but they were not made for food. God allowed certain animals to become food, but there's another category they were not considered food before God. And so that's another topic, but it's an important one, because it's in the book of Revelation scriptures, where Revelation is quoted from Isaiah, and you go back to read the rest of Isaiah, God's making a judgment on those who eat rats and swine. That's what that, rats and pigs. So that's important to understand. So, because God's now turning loose his judgments, where he's winked, as Paul said in time past, because of people's ignorance, but now because of Yeshua's come and the word is gone worldwide, people are without excuse. They have access. They can know the truth. God will make sure, just as sure as Cornelius, God sent an angel to him. When no preacher would go to his house, God sent an angel to tell him how to get a preacher to preach the gospel. And if he needs to, if somebody just missed it, he'll do like he did with Philip, chapter 8. He'll send someone like Philip down to meet one person just to get them saved, and then transport them back to where they need to go. And that's a testimony of a brother that actually got transported while he thought he was asleep, got transported to another country, preached the gospel, and then came back, didn't realize until he saw his boots was wet when he woke up. That was an amazing testimony. But I won't get into that right now. But let's see if I can find that testimony, who that person was. But anyway, right here, back at the bottom pit, we're already out of our time. But what I want to just point out right here that we get clear is because when we won't see this until we get over there into chapter 11, that this is the one that's going to kill the 2 witnesses. And he's not Satan, because Satan is not in the bottomless pit. He's operating in the heavenly realm. the second heaven, in the middle, actually, the middle heaven, in the way. King James translated the way in 2 Thessalonians, but that word way is literally the word the middle, which is the second heaven, where he's going to be cast down with his angels as have been battling Michael and his angels, the heavenly angels, since the fall. They've been trying to intercept God's dealing with his people on earth since the fall. And that's what was going on with Job. He wasn't in the third heaven. He's in the second heaven before God's throne, but the throne is in the third heaven. He was operating in the second heaven where he accuses us to God. And so, but you got a bottomless pit where certain beings have been reserved. You got other beings such as death, such as Hades. They themselves will be thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. So these are beings. That's something to think about. Death is the last enemy that will be destroyed. You go back to 1 Corinthians 15, God's going to tell us there in that, through Paul, that the last enemy, after he put all his enemies under his feet, Yeshua, then he's going to deliver the kingdom over to the Father so he can be all in all. But Yeshua is going to reign until he brings everything underfoot. That's when he comes back to his 1,000-year reign. Right now, he's dealing with his judgments that already started against the nations that are leading up to that. And so, again, you see that word bottomless pit. I give you the rest of the places if you're not looking at the screen right now. That was the 7 places where they are translated. It's translated bottomless pit. It's Revelation 9:1, 9:2, 9:11, chapter 11, verse 7. That's where it talks about him as the beast that came out of the bottomless pit that's going to make war against the 2 witnesses. Then in chapter 17, verse 8. See, 17 verse 8 is not where you get into the 7 events being announced. And we're the 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. But it's the informational chapter. And how do you know where it fits in? It's because it tells you about this beast here in chapter 17, connecting him with what John is seeing with this woman who's riding this beast. This beast that ascended out of the bottomless pit. And so we know that that beast that ascended out ties back to the 5th trumpet, where we are right now. Revelation chapter 17, verse 8. See, not all of the books are dealing with chronology. They deal with information. Same way it did in chapter 2 of Genesis, not dealing with chronology. The chronology is in chapter 1 up to chapter 2, verse 3. But after that, he starts elaborating, giving information about what happened in the 6 days of work, particularly the 6th day, because that was the crown of his creation, mankind. And so in Revelation flows in a similar way, where you got chapters that are paragraphs that are informational, but you have to identify the information in them where they are mentioned actually in the count, where the 7 seals are being opened, the 7 trumpets are being sounded, the 7 bowls of wrath are being poured out, because they will connect by the information that's in them. So you have 21 sequential events in terms of the 3 sevens, 7 seals, 7 bowls, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls. But the rest of the information that is not, when he's counting these 7s, you find where they connect with something that is mentioned there that lets you know where it fits in. And so we'll come back and continually review that as we go through this. So at this point, we said we're out of time. We're going to take some time for some questions. Anyone have any questions concerning what we're dealing with right now? This is a woe. Remember, this is the first woe. The first woe is the locust out of the bottomless pit. And they're only going to kill, they're not killing anyone. They're causing great pain to the point that people will wish they were dead. And these are people that don't have they're not of the 144,000, the leaders who are, how you say, inoculated by God's seal upon their forehead. I didn't tell you that they received it on their forehead, but I'll tell you later in chapter 14 where that seal was placed. And that seal had to do with the name of God. So we see this going on in chapter 9. And you know, it's a lot of verses dedicated to this 5th seal. And this is the only one that's not dealing with thirds. No thirds are mentioned, no fraction. But most of your trumpets are dealing with thirds. It's very important to note that. The description. No questions, anyone? You might need to tell the new ones. If we have the new guests, how to ask questions if they have any, what they need to do.
Okay. So, if you have any questions or comments, I actually have everything in open mode. You may feel free to ask now.
Oh, I didn't mention the last 2 sevens of the bottomless pit. Chapter 20, verse 1 of Revelation, and chapter 20, verse 3. That's when Satan himself is going to be cast into the bottomless pit. He's not there, and he won't be there until those last 2 verses there, chapter 20, verse 1 and verse 3, which we'll be getting to later.
So, if you don't have any questions or you have any comments, feel free.
Brother McLaughlin.
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To both of you. I have been. I'm concerned about our presidential format now. Where are we in history concerning this election coming up?
We are leading up to the destruction of New York and D.C. and but Zechariah saw both 9/11, what we call 9/11.
Yeah.
And that was chapter 6. Mm-hmm. But in chapter 5, you got to start with chapter 6 and go back.
Go back. Hello. Hello. Hello?
I can hear you.
I can't.
Okay.
Okay, now.
Okay, what about now?
I'm sorry. Yes, I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. So this is what I'll restate. In Zechariah, from chapter 1 to chapter 6, he is given visions. 7, some say 8, depending on if you divide one of them up into 2. But they're in the reverse order in which they are actually going to be fulfilled in the book of Revelation. Okay. And so when you go to chapter 6, you only need to read 3 verses to see this, because that's where he sees the 4 horses of Revelation chapter 6, which we call the first 4 seals. Okay. What Zechariah saw that John doesn't mention, because it's already written in his Bible in Zechariah, is Zechariah saw the twin towers, the 2 brass mountains.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah.
And then he's called the plains, he called them chariots.
Okay. Okay, I can't hear it again, so. Okay.
When I say I can hear, I'm talking about I can hear you. I can't hear them either.
All right. Thank you. I was kind of getting a little leery there.
No, I can hear you, not them.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, was it charged?
Oh, that might be
Okay. So I think my laptop mic doesn't. Its charge is running down, so it's shutting down.
All right.
We'll put it aside. And can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay. So take divisions and go from chapter 6 backwards, and you'll be going from 9:11 until Jesus is.
Keep going out.
Yes, he is gone there. I can hear it. I just wanted to know some information about it because so many things are happening now. It's confusing and everything, and I just
Can you hear?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. Just talking.
Okay, so the things that are happening in the United States of America, number one, biblically, what they're dealing with is what God promised Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. That they would be in a land, his seed would be in a land not their own. And they would serve that nation, singular, and be afflicted by them 400 years. At the end of that 400 years, after that 400 years, the Lord spoke that he would judge that nation and then bring them out with great possessions.
Mm-hmm.
That 400 years expired in 2016. This is where Ephraim became, this is based on Genesis chapter 48, verse 19, where Ephraim, Joseph's youngest son, would become the multitude of nations. Now it says a multitude in the English translation, but the definite article ha in Hebrew, same as our the, is there in the scripture itself. And in the New Testament, it's translated as the fullness of the Gentiles, but the word nations is translated as Gentile sometimes, which is somewhat of a misnomer because it simply means nations. It's the word goy and goyim, goy singular, goyim plural. Now, why this is important? Because what happened to Egypt is getting ready to happen to the United States.
Okay.
Okay, and because of what happened to God's people here, where Ephraim went through the same kinds of things as Joseph. That's where we went through the 7 P's of Joseph and how God showed us through Joseph's descendants in each of the stages of Joseph's life after he was from chapter 37, from him being in pride because he didn't acknowledge God. And you find that we've been a proud people. You go back and even remember the Black Power pick, Black Power comb, Black Power pride. Black pride was all about pride. And God hates pride in any shape, form. And when we were in the land, we were prideful. It speaks of of Ephraim as being prideful, the northern kingdom. Changed the worship of God, the time of the worship, all of these things that we did when we were in the land. And when we got kicked out, the last curse that God pronounced in Deuteronomy 28 was that Moses said that we were going to go back into Egypt, which in the Ten Commandments is also called the house of bondage. He said we would go back to it by ship. The northern
I'm sorry. That is curious to me because I don't know how, but a lot of things that are unexplainable are going on in Britain. And I know in the earlier times that Britain was intertwined with the United States. And I just get a feeling that something major is happening. And, I was kind of trying to discern what was going on as far as Britain and America.
Yes, it is, because, see, basically what you have is the two houses ended up being divided. And when they were divided, the crown of David is removed from the land of Israel, the land, he prophesied to David that he would continually have descendants reigning forever.
Okay.
But when Zedekiah, after Nebuchadnezzar came in, there were no more. And since that time, there have been no descendants of David serving as king in the promised land, in the land that was given to Israel. But he said that they would continue to reign over Israel. Israel went into captivity before Judah.
Okay.
See, when he made the promise to David, they were united as one kingdom. But when they separated into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom inherited the name because Jacob gave it to Ephraim and Manasseh.
Mm-hmm.
Ephraim became, just to be quick because of our time, there's a complete teaching where we can walk through a lot of scriptures that outline the path that the northern kingdom took and then the path that the royalty of David took to what landed them at Britain. Right now, Prince Charles, King Charles, the prince whose time has come, he is now king. He's a direct descendant from David.
Oh God, okay. All right.
And it's in his official genealogy. If you pull the genealogy of it started with Jeremiah and the two daughters, I would say two. It says daughters. We know it's plural. We know it's at least two that were not killed, and they were not revealed who their names were because all their brothers were murdered, were executed when Zedekiah tried to run away from Nebuchadnezzar. He saw all of his sons murdered, slaughtered, executed, and then his eyes were poked out. So that would be the last thing he would remember for running away from Nebuchadnezzar. If he had known that there was a law given by God during the time of Moses, which the Gentile nation, the nations outside of Israel, outside of the people of Israel, didn't know about because women didn't have rights like they were given to God, that God made sure women received their rights under the law of God. So they were treated much more justly because God gave laws that put people on equal standing before Him.
Okay.
But the other nations didn't know about this. So when they killed the men, his sons, they thought they just done with any heirs that could come back and try to overthrow Babylon and put Israel back in power, Judah back in power, not Israel. But the king had daughters, and if you remember the story in Numbers, the daughters of Zelophehad, who are descended from Joseph through their father Zelophehad, they go to Moses and say, "Our father, he did not die in the sin of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram when the earth opened up." They make reference to that. He died in his own sin, but he had no sons. So when we go into the land, what's going to happen to our father's portion of inheritance?
Mm-hmm.
And they brought this to Moses, and Moses brought it before God, and God said what they say is good because, and it's in Numbers chapter 36, you're going to see where he tells them that if there's no sons, the daughter inherits what would have been the son, because it was the firstborn son that would become the leader of the family when the father passed. And it also was passed that duty. Now, why this is important? Because this is how Prince Charles comes to be where he's at right now.
But
yes, ma'am.
I was just saying that it seems as if women are stepping forward now because I look at King Charles' wife, and she is the queen now. And then with our president to be hopefully, she's going to be. So how does the hierarchy? The men are not in charge; it's the women that are coming forward. So I was just wondering, where is that in history? Okay, we'll
that's why that is the main theme of the middle church. That's why when you count the 7, you get to the middle church. The middle church is the 4th church, which is Thyatira, and it mentions Jezebel.
Okay.
Why is Yeshua mentioning Jezebel in relationship to the Great Tribulation? Because it's only Great Tribulation is only mentioned 3 times in the whole Bible, all in the New Testament, and 2 of the 3 times is red letters. Jesus himself, Yeshua himself, is talking, and this is where Yeshua himself is talking about Jezebel and how he's going to kill her children and how he will do it with death and cast them into great tribulation. Because what is happening at this time is a type of, if you know the history of Thyatira, that's where it's revealing what's going on right now. There's a prophecy, and I meant to write it down. I will be covering it when we get into chapter 12 when we're dealing with the woman. But because of the whore and the chapter 17, 18 that's riding the mother of harlots.
Okay.
Because it's all going to tie in there where we will deal with it in detail. But right now where I'm dealing with is the beginning of it is David's throne was removed from the land after Zedekiah's death, and through the daughters marrying their distant cousins who were twins. See, people forget that David was a descendant of Pharez, one of the twin sons of Judah, through his daughter-in-law, Tamar, Genesis chapter 38. But the other twin, Zerah, is the one who had the red cord tied around his hand, because he presented his hand during the birth first. But even though his brother came out first, he was the first one to present. And that red cord, the theme of that red cord is the same as the blood on the doorpost, the same as the red crimson cord that, remember, Rahab, to show who she was so that she wasn't her family would be protected when they came back to take Jericho down. They see that crimson cord hanging from her wall. They know she's in covenant with us. She ends up in the genealogy of Yeshua as one of his grandmothers, Jesus' great-grandmothers, Rahab. And so where you have this red cord tied around Zerah, a twin brother. Remember, the scepter belongs to Judah. Zerah has a right to reign as much as Judah does. I mean, as brother Pharez. David comes through Pharez. So what happens, there was a breach. And if you go back and read it, that's what the word is used there. I guess you would call it the midwife said, this is a breach, call it a breach. How that breach is healed is by bringing Zedekiah's daughters back into union in marriage with their distant cousins who had never sat on the throne. Zerah, who had the red cord. And Zerah went into captivity during the northern kingdom's captivity, so they reigned in a region called, later on, during the time of, later it's called Ireland. Today it's called Ireland, but at that time it wasn't. And this is where you can trace Jeremiah coming with the daughters of the king, where their distant cousins are already in the diaspora in that region and are positions of authority, reigning. Those daughters, or at least one of them, marries back into Zerah's line with Pharez. So God keeps his promise to David that every one of his descendants will always be in charge as kings until the final king comes, which is Jesus. And how this was accomplished was when they married back into the line of Zerah, all of their children are descendants of Zerah and Pharez through David, Pharez, and through Zerah, the other part. And when you have a copy of, you could get an official copy of from Westminster Abbey. They no longer understood from a minister that ordered an official copy that they stopped sending official copies out but you can still access the genealogy of the crown, and it goes all the way back to the time of Babylon and that daughter, the daughters of Zedekiah. But the precedent that was set was when God said that if there are no sons, the daughters inherit the birthright of what would have been the first son of the son. But the stipulation was they had to marry within their tribe. Because if they married another person from a different tribe, then that tribe would take the inheritance that was given to one of the other 12 tribes. And so the stipulation that they had to marry someone that was within their same tribe. And so what happens there when these daughters marry into Zerah, they're married into Judah, who is a twin. From there the line, the Ireland conquers the Picts. The Picts renamed Scotland. There is evidence that the one of those daughters was named Scotia. So we get Scotland, and Nova Scotia. And then if you follow the crown, it went from Ireland to England, Britain. And that crown, and this is prophesied in Ezekiel. Tutorial, I'm going to pull up the scripture, but it's in Ezekiel. It's chapters, I think it's 17 or 21, but where Ezekiel, God prophesies that the crown would come off and that it would overturn 3 times. He says, overturn it, overturn it. Ezekiel 21, verse 27. This is where this is prophesied in Ezekiel. Chapter 21, verse 27. And if you read the verses before that, it's where he's dealing with the wicked prince of Israel, whose day is come, when iniquity shall have an end. And this is where the crown is moved from Pharez when Zedekiah dies, and then it's overturned 3 times. God says, I will overturn it, and it shall be no more until he whose right it is, and I will give it him. The one whose right it is Yeshua, Jesus. But there's 3 overturns from the time of Jeremiah. The first overturn was when they were moved to the region of Ireland. The second overturn when the crown moved to when they conquered the Picts and renamed the Picts Scotland. The third overturn was when it overturned from the Scottish crown to the English crown of England. Same king. He said a dual kingship. I think it was James. I have it in my notes in the history when I teach on this, but that was the third overturn. There won't be another overturn until Yeshua is back on earth. But it tells you that the one that gets overturned to before he comes back is called he was the wicked prince of Israel. And when his day comes, he is going to do wickedly. He has a birthright in the natural, but he is not going to follow that birthright. And matter of fact, if you know what's been going on and follow what's been going on in Britain, they're no longer have any respect for the disciples of Jesus Christ, or what we call Christianity.
Yes.
And U.S. is following suit because they're pushing in the direction of a one world government, which is the United Nations.
Yes. Yes.
Where we no longer have sovereign nations. And so to do that, you have to use democracy, because democracy is what you use to divide the people.
Yes.
That's what Alexander used. Alexander the Great. Yes. And so when you get the people divided between 2 parties, you don't realize that neither one of those parties, this happened in China, this happens in Russia, if we know the history, they're using the party system to divide the people while all the power is being used under the United Nations policies and laws.
Yes.
And so your party system is a smokescreen Satan is using to divide us up so that can conquer and eliminate our sovereign borders. Both parties are being used by Satan. And that's why Zechariah God says he's going to destroy New York and D.C. using nukes because of the ones who swear falsely in my name. That's one of the houses, and the house of the thief, New York. The house of the thief, referencing New York. The house of the one who swears falsely in my name is D.C., where they take an oath to uphold the Constitution, but they're not pushing for Constitution. They're pushing for one world government.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So there's a lot more detail in the scripture concerning this, and I'm not even scratching the surface right now. That would be a complete, total teaching in itself, dealing with what is going down right now in the seals, because we walk the seals. We're in the seals, and we're at the third seal right now in the U.S. The seals of Revelation pertain to the U.S., so we're halfway to the destruction of New York and D.C. by nukes.
Okay.
Starting with 9/11, which Zechariah saw.
Thank you.
Chapter 5 is the nuke. Chapter 4 of Zechariah is the two witnesses. Because when you read in chapter 11 of Revelation about the two witnesses, it quotes chapter 4, the ones who standing before the Lord of the whole earth. Chapter 3 of Zechariah is the church is cleaned up. Because that's when the seventh trumpet is going to sound, the last trumpet. Then you get to chapter 2, Yeshua's back on earth, having a 1,000-year reign. And at the end of that, it's all done. Because Satan and everyone that's died outside of the Lord is going to be in the lake of fire, and then there will be a new heaven and new earth. So there's a lot we're going to keep working through as we go through this. I'll be pulling in a lot of details on here, but some of these things that I'm mentioning, they're complete studies in themselves. And I do want to get to them because our time is short here in the U.S. We're getting ready to make an exodus out of this country. And that's prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 20. Start at verse 32 to go to 44. It takes us through the wilderness again, and then we'll enter into, when Yeshua comes back, we'll come back to the land with him. He is the Joshua, Yeshua, that is going to actually bring us back into the land after the bowls of wrath have been poured out, as he makes a full end of all nations, so that he becomes King of kings and Lord of lords. So he's using Satan like he did with Job, but he's going to increase us in the end, just as he did Job.
Okay.
Thank you. There's a lot happening. I hope I had that answer some to the question, because it's a smoke. What's going on with the party system is a diversion.
Okay, I appreciate it. As I watch, things that are going on in Britain and the things that are going on in the U.S., I see something. Sometimes there's a combination. It's just confusing to me, so I'm just going to wait and kind of walk through with it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hopefully, at some of the time we'll get some of the other details to help fill in some of this. And there's some YouTube places on YouTube that tell you, that are informing the details. What, like King Charles, what he has been doing. He's been busy behind the scenes while he was a prince. But when you do a study on him from the biblical standpoint, it becomes clear what's going to happen. Because he is like Absalom, going to stand against King Yeshua when he returns. He's going to be opposed. Him or his immediate descendant, one who's working with him. Because you understand, he's dealing with some elements, but there's a lot that remains to be seen. God don't give us the whole picture, but he lets us know where the authority that he's put in the earth is. Britain, you remember Manasseh was also with Britain. South Africa. Nelson Mandela was Joseph's son, descendant, that came out of prison and became president of South Africa. Over here, Obama represented Ephraim, that didn't come out of prison, but represents the same people here that have gone through every P that Joseph's gone through. Martin Luther King was pointing at this.
Yes.
Muhammad Ali was pointing at this. He was the one who was prideful, that said, I'm the greatest, when Joseph said there was no one greater in the house that he was. So God raised up prophetically to let us know who we were. This nation is getting ready to be judged. And when you read in chapter 12, where it says the woman is going into the wilderness, we're going to get there in chapter 12, the woman in the wilderness, that's the bride.
Okay.
And that's the fulfillment of Ezekiel 20, verses 32. Not all the way to 44, but to the wilderness, through the wilderness. He shortened the time. It's not going to be 40 years. It's going to be 3.5.
Okay.
And that's going to clean the church up.
Okay.
Then he brings us into our inheritance. He's taking us through a wilderness. That's why Paul wrote 1 Corinthians chapter 10 to say this is for you. What happened in the wilderness is for you upon whom the ends of the wilderness come, because we're going to have to walk it out.
Okay. All right. You get kind of muffled. Thank you so much. And I'll keep listening.
Okay.
You all have a blessed day.
More details as we get into these chapters, because chapter 13, we'll be dealing specifically with the United Nations government.
Yes. Okay.
Because that's the first beast.
Yes.
The United Nations is that fourth beast in Daniel chapter 7, which is getting a headquarter wound, going to get the head wounded, deadly. The New York headquarters has been there since 47, and then that headquarters is going to take on a new location. So it's going to come alive in a new location. And I will deal with that location, who it is.
Okay. I think the United Nations are meeting in this month. So it's just going to be interesting. Thank you so much for taking the time to kind of get me through there. You have a blessed day. Both of you have a blessed day. Okay.
Have a blessed day, everyone. If anyone has any more questions, we'll entertain. If not, you need to go. Feel free. This is you can always access the recordings online later if you didn't sit in on the lesson today. But if we got any more questions, I want to give an opportunity before we close.
Or comments.
Comments, yeah. Amen. Thank you. Any comment? If not, everyone have a blessed week and study. Remember, continue in the Word. Show ourselves approved under the Lord, because we're reading current events. Things that are happening in the earth right now are written. Have a blessed week.
Thank you.
You're
Bye
welcome.
for now. You're welcome. All glory to the Lord.
Have a blessed day.
Have a blessed day.
You too.